Council have approved and that are contained within Appendix E of the report, and the Council complied with all those indicators during the 12-13 financial year. So those are the three main sections of the report. The overall conclusions are set out in section 13. I believe that the report represents an improvement in the Council's overall financial position and an improvement in the financial position in terms of the forecast that was last approved by the Council. That said, members are already aware of the underlying budget position and the challenge that the Council has got going forward, as indicated in the forecast. But I think that the outturn position leaves the Council well placed to face those uncertainties. Cabinet this evening is asked to, going back to the recommendation page, Cabinet's asked to approve the outturn position and the slippage as detailed in the appendices, to approve the transfers to and from reserves as set out in the report, to approve the capital outturn position, the capital financing and capital slippage, and to approve the Treasury Management Annual Report. Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions, members? Councillor Buckley.
No real questions. I've been through the report, Mr O'Donoghue, quite thoroughly, but I would like to commend his work and the work of his team in all that they do, and the officers in getting us to this position. It's commendable, and I know that the timetable that the Finance Department work within is really tightened up and has got more so in recent times. All the work towards the budget preparation, and then as soon as that's done, towards the end of the year, to outturn, to statement of accounts, for the annual audit. It's just a machine that keeps turning, and I think turning very well. So I do wish to commend the work. And with the announcements today, we do know that we're still looking at reducing funds going forward. So although it's a strong position we're in, and we're very grateful for that, we know that the forecast is further reduction 10%, 2015-16. So even though we look cash rich, we have to be really cautious about what's coming down the line. And I think the decisions that we've taken recently reflect that, and I'm sure we will continue to do so.
Councillor Fiddler.
Ah, yes, the lighting call. 2 points to follow on from what Councillor Buckley said. I want to take the opportunity again to thank Councillor Buckley and Paul, because I've said before, and I don't grow weary of repeating it, never in the 30-odd years I've been part of this Fylde Council have I had an opportunity to appreciate a statement describing the financial well-being of this council in the terms that we've done this evening, and it's a credit to this administration that we're in that position. And the second point was just to follow on from Councillor Buckley, that we have had the chance of making his public spending announcements today. I know it's early and we've had little time to appreciate it, probably, but was there anything obvious in what the Chancellor had to say that may impact on these accounts in a more serious adverse way than just a general consideration of more public cuts?
I mean, as you say, it's very early days. The broad indications are that the announcement today was broadly in line with what we've already reflected in our forecast. I mean, bearing in mind that it's only 2015-16 that the announcement today was for, and it is very early. The devil is always in the detail. We've already reflected some downside in the forecast. We've already assumed some reduction in central government funding, which is broadly in line with the announcements today. I know there are other councils who were not assuming such reductions, and they no doubt face significant challenges. I'm not saying that we won't face those challenges, but what we've got in our forecast already is broadly in line with what was announced today.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No, the most the word we use in terms of accepted reports is it gives pleasure. I think this is an instance where it does actually. Oh.
At a time. Happy to move the recommendation. I also believe that this report will go before scrutiny, so they'll have the opportunity to reflect and ask questions, which is good. So, thank you.
So seconded by Councillor Buckley, and I'm delighted to second this this report. And may I also say to Paul as well that these are absolutely excellent results all across the board, and your team are to be commended for that, and yourself. It is particularly significant as well, having done some considerable work on budget heads in the last 12 months, to look carefully at the budget heads that were underspending, and to reform those budgets, which was a large piece of work, and to actually then come forward again with some extremely positive results is an absolute credit to Farnborough Council. It's a credit to this administration, it's a credit to the officers, and I thank you very much indeed, and I'm delighted to second this item. Are we all in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Item 9 is the allocation policy and tenancy strategy for social housing in the borough. Mr. Gillett, good evening.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Is that on? Yes, it is, isn't it? Okay. I'll just introduce a number of items. I suspect there'll be a number of questions around this, and I'll try and pick up some of the questions that were raised earlier arising from the scrutiny minutes as well. I mean, very briefly, by way of background to this, I mean, you will all remember 12 months or more ago signing up to the Fileco's choice-based letting scheme and the issues surrounding that. And here we are 12 months later on, now having got that scheme in place. And let's be clear about this, it's been delivered by housing associations. You as a council have a responsibility to a strategic role. You're not involved in the direct letting of properties. So what you have here tonight are some of those changes around that allocation policy, which as a council, all councils are required to have one, even though you are not a deliverer of housing yourself. And this enables those housing associations in that partnership to use that allocation policy as a framework for doing the allocations to the housing stock that they manage and let. The other document is the tenure strategy, which is a new document which has come out of the Localism Act, which I will touch on. So that's the background to it. I wish I'm going to make that clear at the front of the document. The allocation policy itself was approved by yourselves 12 months or more ago, and in that intervening period there have been a number of changes. The Localism Act has come along, other guidance has come out, and as the scheme's been operating, one or two changes have been thought to be seen necessary as well. So those changes were put together in a draft document, suggested for change, and that draft document went through the scrutiny process twice. It went through in January as an original document to say, here are some of the consultation changes that are proposed, or change proposed to the allocation policy, to go out for consultation and report back to scrutiny at the end of that process. So there on page 1, it lists, excuse me, that it went to the January meeting of scrutiny, and it was noted that the review of the allocation policy was to take place, and report back on the consultation responses that would happen from it. That document was then brought back in May, having had the consultation undertaken. And quite rightly, as you picked up, and it was mentioned by the chair, there was issues around the numbers that had responded. A lot of detail was taken through scrutiny in terms of these are the questions that were asked, and these are the responses that were given. This was the change that was going to be made. So a lot of detail was given on that to scrutiny. I haven't included it here because it was quite a comprehensive document, but the comment was made that there was only relatively few, 84 I think it was, total consultation responses. And of those, only a smaller number came from the filed area. Now, those people who were consulted with, or those organisations, were the same organisations on which the original consultation was done 12 months previous. So they were in the loop, as it were, knowledgeable about it, clear what was being delivered from it, and had the opportunity to note the changes that were being proposed and make comment on it. It was disappointing in terms of the response, but you could say, well, actually, they were quite happy with how things were, and the changes that were proposed, they were accepted. But I do acknowledge that it would have been helpful had there been greater response to it. But nonetheless, we feel it was a robust exercise. And even when we thought we could maybe get more responses by extending it, an extension was done of that to give people more time to respond to it. So I think everything was done at the time, but I think it's right to reflect on that for future consultation exercises. I'll just touch on the main issues that are proposed for change in the allocation policy or allocation policy. The first one is around local connection. A big issue for the borough. The proposal was here that the applicants would need to live in the area for at least 3 years. A lot of debate about whether that was too long, too short or whatever, but the feeling that came back and supported by scrutiny was that that was the right approach to take. So the policy document, the draft policy document, which is in Appendix 1, pages 58 onwards, does incorporate these changes. So the first one was local connection. Second was member of the armed forces. There's been quite a bit of guidance come out nationally about supporting the armed forces and providing priority for servicemen either coming out of the armed forces or former servicemen. That has been incorporated in the change here. That was a considerable point for discussion, I think it's fair to say, at scrutiny. Councillor Nash raised a number of issues around that and was happy with the proposal that's contained in the allocation policy to deal with that. Under-occupation of social housing was another. A lot of debate we know nationally about under-occupation of social housing. Again, that's been addressed in the allocation policy by how that each housing provider needs to address that in terms of freeing up social housing in their stock. Suspension and exclusion arrangements. I have to say this is not much of an issue for Fylde. The housing providers in Fylde did not have a great issue about exclusion and suspension policies. It was more of an issue for Blackpool and their allocation policies rather than here. But nonetheless, it was seen that it should be consistent across the whole area, and therefore it's been included in here that there is a suspension and exclusion policy, which has been agreed with the registered providers. And again, there's detail on that exclusion policy on page 84 in the actual document itself. It lists the criteria which would apply for somebody who was suspended from going on the register and how they may get back on the register for good behaviour or payment of debt or whatever. The next point was existing tenants wishing to transfer. There's been a number of instances that housing providers have found where somebody's been allocated a property and then immediately wants to transfer. So that thought needed to be changed. There needed to be some time limit put on that, and that's been built in there. The next point was about income and savings. A lot of discussion about should there be a level of income and or savings where somebody with accessing social housing should have. And there's again a lot of debate about that. And at the end of the day, the recent consultation paper that the government put out, it's called its pay to stay proposals, was seen as the benchmark for that and set a figure of £60,000, which is actually the lowest figure. The consultation paper talked about an income of £100,000 per year. Clearly not something in this area. I think it was clearly applying more other parts of the country rather than here. But nonetheless, it's now built into this, that principle, if you like, of having an income and saving limit. The major caveat that we all agreed about was that there should be an issue in relation to sheltered housing. It clearly is an issue for Newfylde and other housing providers in the borough about access to sheltered housing, and it may well be that somebody is selling their property and have a need, a great need for sheltered housing. So there was an issue about putting on an age limit in relation to that, and that's covered again in that particular aspect. That was the main changes that were proposed, which I've summarised in the report. but as I say, are covered actually in the allocation policy, which is, as I say, pages 58 to 105. The other issue was the Fylde Coast tenancy strategy, which again is a first, if you like, for local councils, requiring to publish a tenancy strategy. And this sets out, as it says there on page 56, the use of fixed-term flexible tenancies in the housing association stock, the preferred length of those tenancies, outline when they may be used, and provide guidance on affordable rents. Just touching on affordable rents, that's the new rent model that came out about 12 months ago, which is different from social rents. Social rents tend to be around 50% of a market rent, whereas an affordable rent is pitched at 80% of a market rent. So it's a higher rent to cater for the development needs, to be able to deliver the development needs, because obviously the grant funding was being reduced. So this was a means of offsetting that. So the tenancy strategy sets out the policies that would apply in terms of fixed-term tenancies, the prevalence of those tenancies, and guidance on affordable rents. And that's on pages 106 to 117. And again, that went through scrutiny twice. So there's clearly been a lot of debate and discussion around that to reach this document which you have here tonight. The principles of that draft tenancy are there. Those are the principles on which the consultation took place, but the actual document is at the back, which lists the outcomes from that exercise. So in conclusion, I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot of debate through scrutiny on this. It's been shared across Fylde, Wyre and Blackpool. All councils, all three councils are taking it through their own scrutiny process. The recommendations here tonight are for you to adopt and approve the housing allocation policy and also the Fylde Coast tenancy strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Gillett. Councillor Fiddler.
There are 2 points with both the allocation scheme and the tenancy. I think people are familiar with the way I approach this aspect. And they're expecting me to deal with tablets and things of that nature. And I can't press a single button to... Anyway, here we go. I think many on the council are familiar with my approach to this aspect of strategic housing. And you've heard me use the terms and the sentiment that is the provision of affordable housing the cause of deprivation or its solution, and people sort of recoil from that statement. And the reason why I've raised that as a statement is that throughout the country, I feel the letting policies for social housing has been abused to the point where it was a Labour minister, and you've heard me say this before, it was Caroline Flint who said that the letting policies up and down the land was demeaning and dysfunctional because it encouraged people to contrive a scenario whereby you got to the bottom of the list so that you could satisfy criteria for obtaining that social house. So I want to emphasise, I believe that was the historic scenario, and I do feel, David, the way you've put this report together, and it is our statutory function that we have to have, that we are moving in the right direction. But when we took actually the banding and the letting policy, we've got our list of priorities, and for the first time we've included Band E, which is for people who are and have an element of working and still eligible. And when there was a meeting several years ago, a meeting of the RSLs, when I put forward this question that they ought to be a priority. Young people who are willing to work should not be excluded from the ability to get a social house. And as a consequence over the years, we've got Band E. The question is it lip service, or can you give me figures to emphasise and give me confidence that those people in Band E are taken seriously and resources are made available to them? So do we have any figures in terms of what our local RSLs are applying themselves to this particular policy?
Yes, I have some figures, and it touches on the question earlier on about information requested by scrutiny in terms of the numbers on the banding. I've got a comprehensive report In answer to the direct question, no, the information has not gone out yet to the members of scrutiny, because I didn't feel it was sufficiently robust to provide that information. Is it just listed Band A, so many applicants, Band B, so many? It needed to be more detailed than that to give the information about what is Band A, what is Band B, what is Band C, and as Councillor Fiddler says, Band E relates to people who are in work, who have a low need but in work. So that piece of work, I said, don't just give a list out to members, we need to do this broader piece of work. We've now got that piece of work, so it will be going out to the members, rest assured on that. In terms of answer to the question that you're asking in terms of figures, the latest figures that I've got from this report is there are over 1,320 registered applicants on the register. And of those, I have a breakdown of the numbers that are in each particular band. And certainly in Band E, there are 127 registered applicants who are in that particular band of category. That's actually I'm looking at this list now, first thing, it's the third highest band. You would expect the highest bands, the A, Bs and Cs, the ones who in most need to have a fewer number in there. And it's true that they have, although Band B itself has 64 applicants in that list. So I have the figures in terms of the numbers. I've also got the figures as well in terms of the lets that have been undertaken. And in the last year, there were 143 lets in total. And as you would expect, most of those have gone to the highest bands. Certainly Band A, Band B and Band C. 11 of the lets went to Band E. So there is that spread of lets across. Band E did get some of the lets, but clearly the higher priority ones got the vast majority. We get this information now on a regular basis. It's something that as a council we didn't get before. It was held by each individual registered housing association. Now we're able to get that information together. And that's what I want to provide to members. Not something as complex as this, but something that perhaps provides that fairly standard information about the numbers on the waiting list, the numbers who have been let, and which banding. And that's the piece of work that I've asked officers to do, and which has held it going out immediately after the last scrutiny meeting.
Yeah. Leader, I take some comfort in the fact that Band E isn't so simply lip service, although I would have hoped the percentage let was higher than the proportion on the waiting list. The second point is the tenancy strategy, which has changed because of the Localism Act. And you touched on it in your presentation, the significance of the social rent against the affordable rent. But this impacts on us in quite a detailed, considerable way, doesn't it, when we're dealing with planning applications and Section 106 and the ability of the planning authority to deliver social housing. Could you just expand on really on how we at Fowl Borough, in our relationship with the social landlords, are applying this equation of social rent v affordable rent?
Okay. As you'll all be aware, there is a very robust RSL partnership that operates in the borough with the 3 RSL partners, Muir, Great Places and Newfield. So we have regular meetings with them on the particular need to develop in the borough and how that will be taken forward. So we have agreement with them on how that can be done in terms of rents. I mean, they apply the social rent model to their existing stock. And I was interested to hear today that there's an announcement about rent levels in the social housing stock today as well, which I picked up upon. But equally, they are finding that a number of developers are coming to them, either through a 106 agreement or elsewhere, where they're seeking the affordable rent, the 80% rent level, as opposed to a social rent of 50%. What we've found is that when we've done a piece of work on an individual site and looked at the market rents in an individual area, we've actually found that there's not too much difference between a social rent and a market rent. Sorry, a social rent and an affordable rent. The reason for this is two things. Let's say they're coming nearer. The social rent does not include charges, estate charges. Those are separate. So caretaking, cleaning and things like that, communal areas, those are separate. The affordable rent does include it. So there is a convergence very often between the affordable rent and the social rent. You add one to the other and they start to equate out. And we found, for example, down at St David's Road, which is developed by Newfield Housing, that the affordable rent there was not too dissimilar to the social rent. So in those cases, we've said, well, that seems an acceptable way forward. There isn't a difference. But clearly, where there is a difference, where there is, and we haven't come across one yet, the tenancy strategy clearly says in here the circumstances where an affordable rent should apply and should not apply. And it talks about the limits in terms of local housing allowance. It should never exceed the local housing allowance in a particular area. And that's covered in the tenancy strategy. So, yes, let's look at it side by side. Where there's not much of a difference between the two, then there's not really a financial argument. Then apply the tenure strategy and the guidance that's in here for RSLs and developers to show what would be expected and what would not be expected in terms of it going beyond the local housing allowance, and therefore make it unaffordable for the tenants of the property.
Thank you, David.
Councillor Buckley.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions, if I may. First of all, on allocation policy, it's often said, I think there's a perception in the public sometimes that people come to our country and they take our jobs and they take our houses and they take our services, and that might be a total misconception. I just wanted to ask you, what priority are EU migrants and non-EU migrants given in terms of the allocation policy, please?
It's 101.
I was going to say that there is a section in the tenure strategies that doesn't reproduce very well in the printing. Is this on? Is it on? It's page 101, appendix 11. Very simply, my understanding of the regulations nationally is that if somebody is an EU national coming to this country and can demonstrate they didn't work for a 3-month period, then can approach the council in those circumstances for housing support. You as a council deliver that through the RSL, they will use this to apply that criteria. But the criteria that then apply is this allocation policy. So therefore, local connection policy, all the other policies that apply here apply to anybody else. Yes. The question is, have they the right to actually register in the first place? And I think if they're outside the EU, they've got to provide that with the habitual residency test. And if they're inside, they have to be in work for a period of time and they demonstrate that. Then the rules, as you like, as in here, then apply, i.e. in terms of a 3-year local connection with the etc. So I feel if you keep the safeguards, if that's the right word, then clearly your allocation policy caters for that, and we try to cover it in some detail, but perhaps not very well, and this needs tidying up in Appendix 1 on page 1.
Okay, thank you for that. Try your button again, David. It's not.
Sorry,
that's better.
That's it. Sorry.
And then on to local connection. I remember when I was involved in scrutiny of this was really hotly debated about local connection, and could you tell me if it's a local connection in terms of filed Blackpool or Wyre will give you, or do we still retain that individual, which was suggested that we did, so that filed could have its own. It's just the way it's worded.
Yes.
It's the way it's worded.
Right.
In paragraph 4 is not clear, and I just wanted some clarity.
Without even looking at it, let's be clear. Anyone can register. They don't have to have the connection to register. So from Blackpool, Fylde or Wyre, we can register on the register. The issue then is in terms of an allocation. So when a property is allocated, the RSL then has to look at the local connection criteria applying for that property. So if it's a property in Fylde, you have to have the residency connection to Fylde. So there's the 2 levels as well. The first level is the allocation policy itself, and what it says in there. And secondly, if there's a section 106, there's the requirements of the section 106, which could even be tighter than the allocation policy itself. So there's 3 levels. Yes, they can apply from anywhere to get on the register. Secondly, local connection to filed, to be allocated in filed. And then on top of that, there may well be a local connection policy for a particular section 106. For example, a recent one I remember is Ray Green. We had to have a connection to Ray Green. So they could be registered, but wouldn't be allocated.
That's great. How is it monitored? How do we make sure that this
This
policy
reporting mechanism, believe
is
me.
rigorously applied?
Yes.
You talked about it being, this is our role, a strategic role that we have, and we provide a framework. A framework, does that suggest it could be discretionary?
Yes, I hate to use the word discretionary, but I think the words, and I was going to try and find them here, but I think it said should be minded. I think RSL should be minded to adopt the policies in here. It's not a formal requirement to adopt it. The allocation policy is different. That's your allocation policy. We signed up to the file cost arrangements, so it applies to those. So the allocation policy is clear. But the tenure strategy, that is something that they just need to look at and be aware of and build into their own policies. And that's something we're discussing with each of the RSLs to say, there's the tenure strategy of File Council, what's your policy? And we're waiting for those policies to come back and then do the comparison. Now, so far discussions with New File Housing have not been an issue. They've been quite clear that they will be adopting the tenure strategy as set out here tonight.
Okay.
But it's something that we will be keeping an eye on for future and for those RSLs who are perhaps not based in Fylde.
Okay, thank you. And this final point I want to make is about the tenancy strategy. Because you were looking at the home for life
Yes.
type of scenario, and it suggests here that that was looked at, that normally it says social housing landlords should continue to offer lifetime tenancies for older people and specialist supported housing that provides long-term care. Then it says flexible tenancies may be appropriate for homes that are in the shortest supply. Now we all know how much this is in the headlines at the moment with the spare room subsidy, or whether you call it a bedroom tax. Obviously there are those scenarios where people may have been in a property for a long time, family has grown, has moved away, and clearly this is one way of addressing, to have a flexible tenancy is another way of addressing that, to free up those properties when other families are struggling to even, and they may be living in overcrowded accommodation. It seems when I read at the bottom there that no major changes actually had been made. Paragraph 14 on page 56. It says the comments received from the consultation have been discussed by the three partner local authorities. No major changes have been made to the draft Fylde Coast tenancy strategy. So it suggests that those ideas were discussed, were noted, but no major changes were made.
Sorry, that's not well put across then. Those comments that were there that were consulted upon were the issues that were put out there for consultation, and the feedback that came, and there was about 8 or 9 bullet points that came back, confirmed that what you're saying is what people wanted to see, and that has been built into the tenure strategy. So I'm trying to just, whilst I'm talking to you, just identify that for you in the document itself, and it's covered on pages 114 and 115. So what happened was those were the issues of principle which were agreed. Those went out for consultation. There were changes, but what I'm saying is that the major comments that came back were supportive, and those comments were taken to scrutiny, and therefore there were no changes to the document because they were supportive.
Well, that's not clear.
Exactly. I understand what you're saying now. I understand what you're saying. But I would hope if you look at 114 and 115, which sets out the circumstances for using fixed-term tenancies over those 2 pages, I think it'll provide you with the reassurance that you're looking for, and perhaps in that paragraph at the end of the report doesn't quite make that clear.
Good, yes. Thank you for clearing that up, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that comprehensive report, and thank you, members, for the questions, which I found very interesting.
David, it is a comprehensive report, and the questions you asked, Karen, it's probably too comprehensive in the sense that some of this detail and some of the important issues that you raised are lost in the volume of it. I think we would all appreciate if there was a 1-2-page summary of what this very extensive, comprehensive report highlights and identifies as important issues. I think we'd all benefit from that, rather than leading to potential confusion and not sure what's going on.
Thank you.
So, would you be satisfied if this number 14 was put on the recommendation or brought to the fore, that comments received were limited and didn't require change to the policy? Do you want that reiterated, or are you just going to take note?
I'm quite happy with the reassurance received tonight. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Joe?
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'm very happy to propose this policy.
Thank you. So proposed by Councillor Little and seconded by Councillor Fiddler. Are we all in favour? Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much indeed, Mr. Gillett, for your report. Thank you.
Leader, I will just step outside now for this meeting, this matter.
And is the Community Parks Improvement Scheme. And Councillor Fazackley.
Thank you, Leader. Colleagues, this is another episode in the continuing story of our Community Parks programme, this time featuring the village of Staining, which accounts for Councillor Pounder's exit stage left, or right, whichever way you're facing. The recommendation is that a fully funded budget increase for the works be met in the current financial year by Section 106 monies, the sources of which are shown on page 119 of the agenda papers. The Parish Council wishes the monies to be used for children's play areas at 3 locations, and also wishes to manage these projects independently, which will involve them entering a legal agreement with Fylde Council prior to the release of funds, and to provide details of how the funds are to be used, or have been used, within 12 months of the allocation. There's also an indemnity against Fylde Council should the terms of the 106 agreement not be met. I'm happy, Leader, to propose the recommendations to this effect on page 118, and I'm confident that this will make a big difference to the community life of the village.
Any comments?
And I would like to second that. When Albert left the room with a smile on his face, just to inform members of the cabinet, the planning application was approved this morning. I'm off again. Am I doing this deliberately, or is the leader cutting me off? Albert has a smile on his face because an application in Staining was approved this morning with an additional Section 106, not part of the agenda item before us, which guarantees Staining Village another £120,000 for community open space improvements.
Excellent. Any other questions? Thank you. So proposed by Councillor Fazackley and seconded by Councillor Fiddler. Are we all in favour? Thank you. And Staining, obviously, doing extremely well.
Yeah.
Councillor Pounder, please take your seat.
We got to rip it all out.
Yeah. Don't ignore that.
Yeah, we've also been informed as well, Councillor Pounder, of the further success with regards to 106 monies for Staining, which will become apparent in future.
Yeah, if you don't want it,
Thank you. members. And item 11 is on page 122 and is St Anne's Pool Capital Investment. And again, Councillor Fazakerley.
Thank you, Leader. Again, colleagues, you will have been able to refresh your memories on previous decisions of the Council with regard to St Anne's Pool on pages 123 and 124 of tonight's order papers, and I'm sure you will have done. The £500,000 grant from Sport England was confirmed at the end of March. This report is requesting a drawdown of the remaining funding contained within the current capital programme in accordance with financial regulations. The second recommendation this evening pertains to the funding agreement which Sport England specifies as a prerequisite to grant funding, and which details conditions and performance requirements. Members are already fully appraised of these conditions, but there are details at paragraphs 4, 5 and 6 on pages 124 and 125 of the report. Details of the plan to introduce a changing village, incorporating a remodelling of the reception area, can be found at Appendix 1, with a risk assessment at Appendix 2. The closure of the pool will provide an opportunity for any other capital or repair and maintenance work that might be needed, and would be funded by the balance of for such works already within the Council's approved capital programme. On pages 125 and 126, there are breakdowns of the estimated cost plan and the funding for the works, and the report is seeking approval to commence the scheme up to a value of £625,000 for the sums contained within the Council's approved capital programme for this purpose. On pages 125 and 126, there are breakdowns of the estimated cost plan and the funding for the works, and the report is seeking approval to commence the scheme up to a value of £625,000 for the sums contained within the Council's approved capital programme for this purpose. There are no ongoing revenue implications associated with the scheme. Finally, I feel this successful grant application was mainly due to the dedication and skill of our leisure manager, Darren Bell, and I'd like our appreciation of this to be noted. Colleagues, I'm very happy to move the recommendations on page 122 and look forward to seeing the improvements this excellent grant will facilitate.
Thank you, Councillor Fazakerley. Any member comments? Extremely good news, and I would clearly endorse the comments with regards to the excellent work that Darren Bell has put forward in achieving this this £600,000 grant. £500,000 grant, and also the monies from the YMCA, and it will make a vast improvement to the St Anne's Pool, and is certainly another good news story. And I'm delighted to be able to second that, and with Councillor Fazakerley proposing it. Are we all in favour? Thank you very much indeed. And that concludes tonight's business, and thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you.